Have you ever noticed how the most innocent family visits can sometimes take a turn for the weird? Well, what we're looking at today goes way, way beyond weird. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dissect the chilling and honestly deeply emotional Bengali horror story Adim Jatri, which translates to The Haunted Traveler of the Storm. If you're a fan of narratives that mix supernatural terror with heavy, heartbreaking human drama, you are absolutely in the right place. We are going to break down exactly how a totally mundane trip home morphs into a mind-bending journey straight through the realm of the dead.
I made a massive mistake, in trusting. Imagine, just for a second, hearing those exact words practically spat at you in the dead of night by a complete stranger who seems utterly convinced they know exactly who you are. Gives you chills, right? This single loaded line is the beating heart of our entire narrative puzzle today. It's drenched in decades of betrayal and raw rage. But to really get why this moment is so terrifying, we need to understand exactly who the players are in this nightmare.
So let's map this out real quick so you're not lost when the chaos hits. First up is Sumanto, our main guy, just a regular present-day traveler caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alongside him is his wife, Ritu. They're visiting her family's village for the funeral rites of our third key figure, Brojo. He was Ritu's grandfather, a really powerful, respected village head who recently passed away. And finally, the wild card, Harihar. He's the mysterious passenger they run into later on, and at the start, well, nobody really knows what he is. Keep these four in the back of your mind because the tangled web between them is the whole entire ballgame here. Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the grandfather's old shirt. It is so fascinating to me how the most ordinary, forgettable moments can literally set the stage for absolute horror. Picture this. You're having dinner, rushing to finish up because you have to travel back home that very night. Sumanto's eating, and boom, a stray splash of fish curry completely ruins his shirt. Because they're in such a massive hurry, there's no time to wash or dry it, so what does he do? He just borrows an old piece of clothing from the house, specifically a really fine-threaded, antique fotua, basically a type of shirt that belonged to Ritu's late grandfather Brojo. It seems so harmless, right? But without even realizing it, Sumanto is carrying a physical piece of the past right on his shoulders. He is quite literally cloaking himself in the dead grandfather's history. Now here is a detail you cannot miss. When Sumanto pulls this shirt on, he immediately notices a really distinct, unusual smell. It didn't smell like regular mothballs or damp old cloth. No, it smelled like an ancient foreign attar, a heavy perfume. Sumanto just kind of brushes it off, figuring it's just a quirk of an old man's wardrobe. But trust me, this strange, lingering scent, it becomes a massive, massive clue a bit later. It is the invisible thread linking their present-day journey to a very dark, hidden past. Moving right along to Section 2, Journey into the Storm. The safety of the family house is in the rearview mirror, and our couple is out in the wild. Things escalate quickly. You can practically feel the danger ramping up here, shifting from a slightly creepy walk to a full-on fight for survival. They leave at nightfall, and it is pitch black out there. By late night, they're passing this massive, ancient banyan tree with those creepy hanging roots, and they both get that undeniable, spine-tingling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Then, right around midnight, they board this small wooden ferry to cross the river. Exactly at that moment, a violent Kalaboishahi, which is a famously fierce, destructive spring storm in Bengal, just rips across the water. The boat completely capsizes. Sumanto and Ritu are literally drowning in the dark. But then, miraculously, they are violently pulled ashore by some powerful, unseen force. The atmosphere the author builds here is just brilliant. Think about being totally isolated from the normal world. There's absolutely no moon, the frogs are croaking incessantly, which is nature's warning siren for a massive deluge. The boat they get on is practically falling apart, and the boatman steering it, he is way, way too calm about the creeping shadows and the impending storm. But the wildest part? After the boat flips and they are mysteriously dragged onto the muddy shore, the boatman is just gone, vanished into thin air. Sumanto and Ritu are totally alone, freezing, and stranded in the absolute middle of nowhere. Which perfectly sets up Section 3, the haunted bullock cart. Stranded and soaking wet, they desperately need refuge, and that's exactly when the story pivots from a physical survival journey right into a psychological paranormal nightmare. Out of the pitch blackness, they manage to spot a bullock cart just sitting there under a thatched roof.
Now, finding an abandoned ride waiting out of nowhere is a classic horror setup for sure, but the way it plays out here is phenomenal. Grateful for any kind of shelter from the storm, they climb inside, but surprise, surprise, they aren't alone. Huddled in the corner, barely lit by the flickering, dim light of a kerosene lamp, is a mysterious third passenger.
And the passenger speaks. But here's the twist. He doesn't greet Sumanto like a stranger. He says, "Did you recognize me, Kishore?" Sumanto is understandably incredibly confused. He tries to quickly correct him like, "Hey, I'm not Kishore, my name's Sumanto." But the passenger completely ignores that. He mysteriously mistakes Sumanto for Kishore, which, remember, was the dead grandfather's name. This is that stomach-dropping moment where we realize that the antique shirt Sumanto borrowed is doing a whole lot more than keeping the rain off. To whatever entity is sitting in the dark with them, Sumanto literally is the grandfather.
And the duality of the spirit is just horrifying. When Sumanto keeps insisting he isn't Kishore, the passenger absolutely snaps. He drops that terrifying line we talked about earlier, "I made a massive mistake in trusting you." During the argument, the kerosene lamp gets knocked over, flames erupt, but in the blink of an eye, the fire just vanishes, and the lamp resets itself completely unburned. It's pure, impossible magic. And in that brief flash of light, the passenger transforms. He goes from being a calm, sorrowful traveler in old-fashioned glasses into a terrifying, skeletal phantom. He's suddenly consumed by sheer, unadulterated rage, screaming right into Sumanto's face that his wife isn't dead and that everything was a lie.
This brings us to Section 4, Flight Through the Clouds. This is where you realize we aren't just dealing with a spooky ghost in a cart. The very laws of reality are about to break. The two massive bullocks pulling the cart suddenly let out this deafening, totally unnatural shriek. And the cart just accelerates to an impossible, dizzying speed. We're talking so fast that the G-force feels like they're caught in the middle of a violent spinning whirlpool. Sumanto is terrified. He's clutching his wife, who is somehow sleeping through all of this, and he tries to literally jump from the moving cart to save them. But when he pulls back the curtain to leap out, what he sees stops him dead in his tracks.
Imagine being in his shoes, peeling back that heavy cloth and realizing the muddy village road is just gone. The fields? Gone. The cart is quite literally floating in a boundless, empty void. When he looks down, there's no earth, just a churning sea of thick, black clouds. The only illumination is jagged, violent blue lightning ripping across the sky. With the skeletal ghost still glaring at him from the corner, Sumanto realizes the horrifying truth. They are physically traveling through the realm of the dead. The scale of this scene is just absolutely breathtaking.
Section 5, the tragic backstory. Because just as the supernatural terror hits its absolute peak, it violently snaps. Samana wakes up. He's back on solid ground. Ritu is beside him, alive. Morning light is finally breaking. But they desperately need answers, bringing us to the emotional core of this whole thing.
To really grasp the horror they just barely survived, we have to uncover the incredibly human tragedy that actually caused it. Ritu finally wakes up. She hears Sumanto muttering the name Harihar, and her blood runs cold. She knows exactly who he just encountered in the dark. So let's unpack this lore, because it turns out this haunting wasn't just some random evil spirit. It was the agonizing fallout of a broken brotherhood. Decades ago, Harihar and Brojakish were inseparable, absolute best friends. But then, village politics got in the way. Other envious villagers completely manipulated Brojakish, who had the power as the village head, into turning against his best friend. Believing the lies, Brojakish used his authority to deeply insult and publicly exile Harihar and his wife from their home. And here's the real tragedy. Forced out into the night, heartbroken and carrying all their worldly possessions, Harihar and his wife suffered a fatal accident on the road. They were never seen alive again. Brojakish eventually found out he was manipulated, realizing he basically caused his best friend's death, and he lived the rest of his life carrying this quiet, crushing guilt.
And that perfectly tees up Section 6, Peace for the Soul. This brings us all the way back around to the anchor of our explainer today.
Everything suddenly clicks into place. Remember that old shirt, the antique Fochua Sumanto borrowed because he spilled fish curry? It wasn't just a random piece of clothing. It was originally a birthday gift, a deeply loving gift given by Harihar to his best friend Brojakishore, years before their tragic falling out. This completely recontextualizes the whole night. The ghost didn't pull Sumanto and Ritu out of the sinking boat to punish them. He actually saved them, pulling them onto his own haunted cart because he recognized his own gift in the darkness. Through the shirt, he thought his old, estranged friend had finally come back to him.
Talk about an incredibly satisfying narrative payoff. Remember that foreign Adar, that strange, heavy scent Sumano smelled when he first put the shirt on? That wasn't just perfume. It was the literal essence of a broken friendship. Through the fabric of that shirt, the angry, restless spirit of Harihar was finally, after decades of raging in the storm, able to feel his best friend's touch one last time. This wasn't really a story about a monster at all. It was about a spirit yearning for reconciliation. I mean, how often does a horror story end with a ghost finding actual peace just by feeling the warmth of a forgotten friendship? By the way, if you want to experience the terrifying sound design of this story yourself, I highly recommend checking out the Sunday Suspense audio production linked below. It brings this whole chilling storm to life brilliantly. But I'll leave you with this to chew on. How many restless storms out there in the world are just waiting for a simple, honest apology to finally fade away? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.